Britain's confirmed it's holding up to 90 Afghan nationals at its Camp Bastion base in Afghanistan without charge. It's thought some have spent more than a year in detention, but the Ministry of Defense says it'll be ready to hand over the prisoners to local authorities once all the legal obligations are met. Lawyers still say the UK's acted unlawfully, drawing a parallel with America's notorious Guantanamo Bay. Sarah Firth has the story.
UK lawyers who are acting on behalf of some of these detainees speaking out, they've launched a legal action saying that some of these men have been held for up to 14 months and that this amounts to an unlawful detention. Now, the rules dictate that British forces are only allowed to hold detainees for 96 hours unless there are exceptional circumstances. But last November, we saw the Defence Secretary change the rules and halt the transfer of detainees captured by British troops to Afghan security forces after there were concerns that they would be abused or tortured. British troops are now looking for a safe pathway for transfer of these detainees. The safety of British troops also comes into this. These men who are being held, some of them murderers, some of them have links to involvement with IEDs. So I think really making the point here that these are dangerous individuals that could present a direct threat to British troops. If you listen to what the lawyers have come out and said, they've used that word secret facility, and they've actually said that it's reminiscent of the public's awakening that there was a Guantanamo Bay. The UK lawyers have been very clear here that parliamentarians did not know about this, that this was not known to the British public. So you've got the Defence Secretary on the one side saying, you know, this is very different to Guantanamo Bay in a number of very important respects, predominantly that this is for the detainees' own protection, and also that this wasn't a secret, that people have known about it and this has been spoken about. And you've got the UK lawyers saying, you know, hang on a second, absolutely not, this was a secret facility, and this is the public awakening now.
Now, at first, the UK Defence Secretary said that transferring the prisoners could endanger troops. Now, the government seems to have different ideas. Well, to talk more on this, we're now joined live by Jim Brann of the Stop the War Coalition. Jim, thanks very much for joining us here on RT. So how would you explain the change in attitude towards these prisoners?
Well, if we believe the British government, they say they have captured these 85 men. And according to their rules, they are supposed to, when they have finished interrogating them for up to 96 hours, or slightly more in exceptional circumstances, but just slightly over 96 hours. When they finish the interrogation, they are to let them go or hand them over to the Afghan authorities. What the British government claims is that they had to ban handing them over to the Afghan authorities because of what they say is the danger of ill treatment, which I think in many cases we can simply describe as torture, because there is widespread torture. So the British government says that because of its ban under the Torture Convention from handing them over, it has to keep them. But it has no basis to keep them, not least under the Geneva Conventions, for example. So then it just declares for itself the right to keep them because it declares there is some danger from them. They say there is evidence that they are a threat to British troops or local people. And that puts the British government in the same position as the US government regarding Guantanamo. And
well, in this light then, you know, Jim, sorry for interrupting you. So what's the likelihood that these prisoners will actually be handed over now that you compared this facility in Afghanistan to America's Guantanamo, which, you know, America promised on a number of occasions to shut down, but that amounted to nothing so far. So why should this British jail then be different?
Well, I suppose the only real difference is, unless they're forced by pressure, they will keep them as long as possible because they say they can't hand them over and they don't want to let them go. So in that sense, it's the same as Guantanamo. I suppose the only difference is that because it is limited to the Afghan war, and because British troops are supposed to stop being there in a combat role at least within a year and a half's time, then I suppose the British government would say, well, it must come to an end in a year and a half's time. In which case it will hand them over to the Afghan authorities, in which case it will put itself in danger of violating the Torture Convention. So it's got itself into a bind of its own making, I think.
So how come the British Parliament was unaware of the detention centre for so long?
I'm not sure if the Defence Secretary is specifically obliged to mention that, but he certainly hasn't. Apparently there's no mention in the Parliament at all. And I suppose that that means that the parliamentary committees have not done their job, because I think sufficient questioning would have discovered this fact about these detainees. But certainly the Defence Secretary hasn't mentioned it, and there is this rule in Britain called parliamentary sovereignty, and Parliament is supposed to be sovereign. So that's where the issue of contempt of Parliament comes from.
Now, Prime Minister David Cameron called the Afghan mission a success back at the end of 2012, if I'm not mistaken. Now, how much of a blow to his credibility is this revelation then?
I'm afraid there is really nothing that any British or American politician can say regarding the Afghan mission that makes any sense at all. I can show you a speech by Donald Rumsfeld, if you remember him, literally 10 years ago, saying that their job would be simply, as they put it, to train Afghan forces and then leave. And 10 years later, they are saying exactly the same thing. So, yes, I'm sure it will be further blow to credibility. I think from the British government's point of view, they just hope that any opposition will keep quiet and the thing will blow over. I don't think they have any other choice but to keep their fingers crossed.
All right.
But their credibility is shot anyway.
All right, Jim Brann of the Stop the War Coalition, thank you so much for being with us here on RT. Well, earlier I spoke to Rosa Curling, a lawyer of one of the detainees, who said the government has repeatedly declined her firm access to her client.
My client is a young man. He's approximately about 20 years old. He is married with one daughter. He's Afghan and lives in Afghanistan. We have been instructed by his brother and by his uncle, because he was captured and detained by the Brits in August last year, 2012. And today he is still being detained by them, so 9 months on. His uncle and brother asked us to find out why he was being detained and to try and get access to him so we can provide him with legal advice. So far, we have still not been able to gain access to our client, and we still haven't been able to speak to him. We've written to the government, we've asked them to make sure we can speak to him, and so far they've refused. Because of their refusal, we had to apply to the UK courts here and ask the court to order the UK government to give us access. We can see no lawful basis on which our client is being detained by the UK government and the UK authorities in Afghanistan. That's why we have made an application to the court, a habeas corpus application, asking for him to be brought to court and to be released and explain on what basis the UK government is stating that they can continue to detain him. He has had no charges given against him as far as we're aware, and as I said, we've had no access to him at all.